attribute them. There's no...
Okay, got through some traffic, so we're on to video number 2. My story, video number 2. Now, before I go on with this video, I want to make sure I clarify, I am not blaming anybody. My ignorance is my ignorance. My adherence to fantasy is my adherence to fantasy. Had I been more awake, had I been looking around, I would have seen where this was going. Now, society, who I do not blame, because society isn't anything you can blame. It is what it is. Here's a great saying I like. One of the reasons I've begun to change over the last few years, and one of the reasons I actually came to ending my marriage, is simply by reading voraciously about relationships, and there's a reason for that. It'll come out. Reading voraciously about psychology, and there's a reason for that. It'll come out later. I mean, both of which are of interest to me. And philosophy. And one of the statements I've seen in philosophy, and it's from a Stoic philosopher, and it goes basically like this. Those who are ignorant of philosophy blame others for their misfortunes. Those who are beginning to learn philosophy blame themselves. Those who have mastered philosophy blame no one. I am not so arrogant as to say that I am a philosopher. I am not so arrogant to say that I have mastered philosophy, but I must be getting somewhat close, because I really do not blame, at least not to the extent I did 2.5 years ago when I first started this channel. And that's what I didn't want to come across in those early days, was just sitting there, because that's all I could say was, this is somebody else's fault. When it comes to inner dynamics of a relationship, yeah, there is blame you can place on other people and upon yourself. And probably if that blame leads to some level of responsibility and you can have the ability to respond, then possibly there's some benefit in it. Once it's gone, there is no benefit in it, as far as I'm concerned. So what is the point? If it helps you lower the levels of ignorance that you have in your life, if it helps you shed the nonsense of fantasy that we are told, and we can enter into a relationship, whether it's a relationship with a woman, another male friend, a new job, if we can enter any of these new relationships with a little bit more wisdom, then it's probably served some level of a function, and I'll take it from that. However, I will go back to what I was talking about, which is one of the most important things in any relationship between a man and a woman who are having a romantic relationship is, believe it or not, a romantic part of the relationship. And when I say that, I'm talking about physical touch, I'm talking about kind words, encouragement, and yes, even intercourse, sexual intercourse. And men, this is part of who we are. We are hardwired for sexuality. Women will say, well, so are we, and maybe that's true, and I have no doubt that what I hooked up with was probably somebody who had a tendency towards, I'm guessing, a tendency towards lesbianism. Once again, I don't judge. Just don't go around. If you're a lesbian and you're not interested in sex with men, then don't marry a man. Don't do that to him. Because we're both going to be unhappy. And I think that's what happened. She had all the makings for a very heterosexual woman. She was quite good looking. She obviously enjoyed sex at least at one time, enough to reproduce and make 3 kids, which I ended up raising. The father was involved, and as they got older into their teens and stuff, they did go choose to live with their dad the last couple of years of their high school, and I totally understood that, and I was very supportive of them. And that'll probably come out later too. But the sexuality in the marriage dropped to nothing. In the first 2 years I was married, I sat back and I said to myself, she has turned me down over and over again, so I'm just going to sit back and wait until she initiates sex. Well, 18 months later, I finally brought the subject up. And here's what's interesting. Remember, those who are ignorant of philosophy blame others for their problems. Instead of looking at herself and saying, I'm a healthy, normal woman, which I don't know if any of those go together, but instead of saying that, why am I not sexually interested in my husband? And by this time, she'd put on a good 40 or 50 pounds. It was amazing. It was just incredible. I mean, as I look back on it now, I'm just like, wow, that was quite a feat.
In 2 miles, take exit 40 for I-10 East toward Redlands, Indio.
Redlands, Indio. I don't know if you can hear that on the video, but there it is. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this thing while I make the turn, because me and Miss Google don't need to chat while we're trying to chat. Okay, maybe I won't hear from it again for a minute. We can talk a little more. All right. So before I go on, let me break down something I learned a while back. And it's very generalized, and it's definitely probably not as accurate as it once was when I first heard it. But most mental illnesses can be broken down into two ways. You've got neuroses, and you've got personality disorders. And all of us, to some degree, fall into those categories. Some extreme, some not so extreme. But if you're neurotic, which is pretty common, we all have a neuroses or two. I happen to have probably more than my fair share, but I got them. A neurotic has a tendency to take on too much responsibility. In other words, they take the blame for things, which is kind of good in the mental health profession. If you got a neurotic, then you can get them to at least look at, and there's something else that'll come up later, because I was in the mental health industry for a while. And you can get them to look at it, and they'll accept some responsibility. Now, whether they can do anything about it or whether they're willing to do anything about it, that's a whole nother question. The personality disorders look at the world as if everything is somebody else's fault. So, being married, having the sex just die off, and it was very good sex before we got married. I mean, it was a lure that was hung out there, and I bit, as the old saying goes, hook, line, and sinker. I mean, I bought into the whole thing. I thought this was the real deal. And so the sex was great. So if I can throw out one little bit of professional advice to you guys, don't go with the initial sexual response and think that maybe this person's got something to offer you. Matter of fact, it could be a really, really bad idea, because if the sex is too great, you're probably dealing with a crazy person. Anyway, I took it on myself that I must be the issue. And she was more than happy, having a bit of a personality disorder, to let me believe, hello dog, that I was the problem. And I tried to figure it out, and I would ask her, why is it this way? And initially, she had a whole list of things I was doing wrong, of why she wouldn't have sex with me. Now, a lot of them were, okay, I was a cigarette smoker at the time. So was she. And she's like, well, you got smoke on your breath. Okay, well, we both do, but man, did my dental hygiene increase that? Did that help? Of course not, because it wasn't an issue. Then it actually got to the point where she had me cleaning the house on a regular basis. Yeah, I became somebody's bitch. I'll just own up to it. The house wasn't clean enough. This is somebody who's expecting her husband, who got up usually an hour or two before she did, that had worked for 8 hours and had a 1 hour each way, 45 minutes anyway, commute to go to my job, coming home and cleaning house to make sure the house was pristine on the off chance that I might get laid by the woman who promised me that she would meet that need in my life. That's what marriage is all about. That's why, I mean, we did the whole classical, promise to be, just together. That we would cling on to each other, we would hang on to each other, that we'd be faithful to each other, the whole 9 yards. Things that we all, when we go into a long-term marriage or a long-term relationship, especially marriage, that we expect to adhere to. And if we do that, and you marry a guy who is 32 years old, who is healthy and vibrant and interested in sex, who needs it, I mean, it's an actual need, you're expected to be the one to meet that. She wasn't willing to do it and had a whole list of reasons why she would not. And in the meantime, this woman is packing on an amazing amount of weight. So then when that kind of ran out, she decided, well, there's a health issue. And there was health issues, mainly mental health issues, but she was never, and to this day, as I would assume, would never own up to, was never going to deal with. We found out she had a sleeping disorder. Okay, so my hope was there. We got her sleeping disorder under control. But now, I'm having to sleep next to this asexual, possibly homosexual, lesbian, overweight thing with a mask on her face. Even that I was willing to tolerate because I made these vows. See, making a vow to certain individuals, and I think men have an understanding of this far deeper than a woman does, but we take this shit real seriously. So I've made those vows, so I'm hanging in there, buddy. I'm hanging in there. When that didn't fix the problem, here's what's interesting. First, probably 3 years into our marriage, we separated. I just couldn't take it anymore. Whoa. Crazy drivers. And it got worse and worse and worse, and we separated. And believe it or not, when we separated, she came around, we had sex. So I'm already learning the only way that I'm ever going to get laid is to throw out some kind of threat of leaving her. Even that didn't change. And finally you get exhausted on throwing threats. And not to speed up the story and jump ahead, but by the time, out of the 25 years, 15 years in, and I can remember a very precise incident that was the end of it. I never tried again. And that'll come out later in the story too. But I'll tell you the incident. It's really kind of humorous. We were getting ready for bed. It was a work night. And this is a woman who ordinarily would wear a big flannel thing. I mean, if you can imagine the most unattractive gown, sleeping clothing that you could imagine your grandmother wearing, this is what she wore every night. It was a full body chastity belt, and it worked because there was nothing interesting about her sexually. But this night, she put on this very short, very...
There's an 8-minute slowdown caused by a crash in 3 miles. You are still on the fastest route.
Well, crap. Now there's a crash. Oh well. Out of my control, man. So she'd put on this little thing and got in bed. And I thought, oh my goodness, this woman is interested in sex. And I'd hoped, hope really kept me in this marriage for a while. Then just internal death kept me in for the last 10 years. So I rolled over and kind of started rubbing on her, doing those things that a husband would do to try to kind of initiate sex under the guise that sex had already been initiated by what she was wearing. Now, she didn't look that good in this thing, but it gave off the impression. And so I did, and I rolled over and started kissing on her and rubbing on her and doing those things that we commonly call foreplay. And I got snapped at in no uncertain terms. And she let me have it. You would have thought I crawled in bed with a perfect stranger and she couldn't figure out why in the heck I was doing what I was doing. And so I just looked at her and I said, woman, I could have sworn, and I'm sure I didn't say, hey, woman, because I would have got snapped at for that. I got snapped at for shit like that. I assumed you were interested. And she's like, well, just because a woman puts on something like this doesn't mean she wants sex. And I'm like, yeah, it does. And for the past 15 years, you had on a flannel shirt that that showed no interest in it. And it was at that moment I realized this woman is fucking with my head. This is no longer just somebody who's not interested. This is somebody who's interested in being cruel. Now, a lot of men, smarter men more in touch with their own masculinity. You gotta remember, I've had 15 years of having my testosterone cut off from me. Would have said, that's enough. I've had enough. No, it's going to take me another decade. But at least I knew I wasn't going to set myself up, because there is nothing worse. Rejection sucks under any setting. And sometimes we deserve to be rejected because of our own behavior. But when you're just rejected by somebody who has claimed to love you and is going to be with you and meet your needs, and you have helped them establish a career and help them raise their children, when somebody rejects you for something as normal and as human, as intimate as sexuality, that, my friends, is the final kick in the balls. And I do not remember ever initiating sex after that, under any conditions. And it was a miserable, miserable time, because I was still taking my vows very seriously. Okay, that's enough. It's probably, I don't know how long this video is, but I don't want it to get too long. We'll pick it up later, guys. Remember, life is hard. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Talk to you next time.